I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
About the things, the fashions, the things that come and go, and to understand what is the bedrock of society and what makes it tick. And
my mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really.
In a royal institution built on silence, protocol, and tightly guarded tradition, few moments stir the public more than a whisper of truth, piercing through the gold-plated facade. That moment is now. For the first time in their lives, King Charles III and his sister, Princess Anne, appear ready to lift the veil, revealing not just personal reflections, but a hidden pact born from decades of private pain, quiet loyalty, and shared battles beneath the spotlight. The world has always seen them as stoic symbols of Britain's monarchy. Charles, the once waiting heir shaped by duty and controversy. Anne, the no-nonsense royal who outworked them all without complaint. But behind the stiff waves and carefully choreographed smiles lies a bond forged in solitude, secrecy, and storms that only they endured. With Charles now carrying the crown and Anne standing as his fiercest protector, the two siblings are reportedly preparing to speak candidly about the burdens of their birthright, the scars of their past, and the fractures threatening the future of the House of Windsor. Why now? Why pull back the curtain on a lifetime of control and composure? Insiders suggest this move is no accident. It's strategic, emotional, and perhaps even urgent. As tension builds within palace walls and Charles faces not only public scrutiny, but private health battles, it seems the time for half-truths is over. This is not a fairy tale, and it's certainly not damage control. It's something deeper, a rare reckoning from two figures who have quietly shaped royal history and who may now be its final guardians. The monarchy, it seems, is at a turning point, and if what's coming is as revealing as sources claim, the world may soon see the crown in a light it never has before. To the public eye, the childhood of King Charles and Princess Anne unfolded like a majestic fairy tale, palaces, pageantry, and the pristine poise expected of royal offspring. But behind the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace and the windswept landscapes of Balmoral was a childhood shaped not by warmth, but by relentless duty and emotional distance. Born to Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, two of the most watched figures in the world, Charles and Anne entered a life scripted from birth, where affection was sparse, spontaneity discouraged, and every glance was shadowed by a watchful lens. While the world imagined bedtime stories and pony rides under golden chandeliers, the reality was a childhood steered by nannies, tutors, and expectations so rigid that even the faintest deviation could spark scandal. Charles, as the heir apparent, bore the heaviest weight. Groomed from toddlerhood to one day lead a kingdom, his days were choreographed to perfection. How to walk, talk, even how to breathe. Yet beneath the polished exterior was a soft-spoken boy who longed for freedom, for creativity, for a chance to simply be himself. Anne, fiercely independent even as a young girl, pushed back in her own way. The Queen's only daughter often bristled at the suffocating expectations, preferring action over artifice. But even her boldness could not breach the palace code. No tears, no outbursts, and certainly no visible emotion. Their parents, often traveling for royal engagements, were distant figures. Charles would later admit he spent more time with his nanny than his own mother, an admission that echoed the emotional void that defined their early years. It was in this environment, regal yet rigid, that Charles and Anne found each other not just as siblings, but as allies, two children navigating a gilded cage, with only one another as a lifeline to something resembling normalcy. And it was within that quiet companionship that the first threads of their lifelong pact were quietly sown. In a world where royal duty often trumps personal identity, Charles and Anne formed a quiet alliance, a bond not forged by privilege, but by shared resistance against the life they never chose. As the palace molded them into symbols of stability, the siblings found solace in one another, creating their own unspoken language of support. Anne, quick-witted and razor-sharp even in her youth, often served as Charles's emotional armor, offering side glances and hushed humor before public appearances, subtle rebellions in an otherwise suffocating routine. Charles, inwardly sensitive and prone to reflection, clung to Anne's steadiness like a raft in stormy waters. While palace advisors praised Charles for his manners and poise, they quietly admired Anne's steel. She followed the rules outwardly, but never allowed them to break her spirit. Their late-night talks, sometimes through handwritten letters passed beneath nursery doors, became sacred rituals, safe spaces where they could whisper fears, vent frustrations, and dream of lives beyond the crown. It was Anne who once encouraged Charles to sketch what freedom looked like to him, a simple act that spoke volumes in a world of velvet cages. Together, they mastered the performance the public expected, but behind the scenes, they were staging a quieter revolution. Theirs wasn't a rebellion of headlines, but of heart, a shared understanding that, while the palace might control their roles, it could never fully contain their connection. As they entered adolescence, this sibling alliance only deepened, becoming not just a source of comfort, but a strategic lifeline in a royal system that demanded perfection and punished vulnerability. And as their adult lives loomed, with all the rigid titles and demands that came with them, the bond they built in secret would become their greatest asset and their most dangerous threat to the monarchy's carefully guarded illusion was the love that dared not speak its name, at least not in the early years. When a young Prince Charles met Camilla Shand at a polo match in the early 1970s, their chemistry was instant, undeniable, and, for the crown, deeply inconvenient. Camilla, with her irreverent charm and ease around the future king, was everything Charles craved: warmth, wit, and emotional safety in a life dominated by rigid formality. But royal advisors swiftly deemed her unsuitable, not because of her character, but because she wasn't the blank slate bride the institution required. Behind palace walls, Charles fumed, but only one person seemed to truly understand the torment of having to choose duty over love: his sister, Anne. Anne had lived her own version of heartbreak, reportedly pressured out of pursuing a romance, deemed improper by royal standards. So when Charles turned to her for solace, she didn't question his feelings, she defended them. Through whispered conversations and late-night letters, Anne became his confidant, offering emotional refuge during a time when even his own parents kept their distance. But nothing could prepare them for what came next: the global spectacle of Charles's 1981 wedding to Lady Diana Spencer. To the world, it was a fairy tale. To Charles and Anne, it was the burial of a dream. Anne saw through the dazzling gowns and cathedral grandeur, sensing the emotional chasm widening behind the scenes. She knew this wasn't a love story. It was damage control disguised as destiny. As Charles smiled for cameras and waved from carriages, Anne stood in the background, tight-lipped, watching the monarchy orchestrate a union that would eventually unravel on the world stage. Her support never wavered, but her concern deepened, because this wasn't just a romantic compromise. It was the beginning of a public and private implosion that would test the crown and the siblings' pact like never before. When the world awoke to the shattering news on August 31st, 1997, that Diana, Princess of Wales, had died in a devastating car crash in Paris, shockwaves rippled through every corner of the globe. But inside the royal family, behind those stoic stone walls, the impact was something else entirely: chaos, fear, and unspoken blame. Prince Charles, grief-stricken and emotionally paralyzed, found himself at the center of a storm he wasn't prepared to weather. While the press hunted for culprits and the public demanded answers, one figure moved swiftly and silently into place: Princess Anne. According to palace insiders, Anne was among the first to reach Charles that morning, not as a princess or protocol enforcer, but as a sister stepping into the eye of the storm. She shielded him, emotionally and logistically, from a royal machine unsure how to respond to a tragedy of this magnitude. As the monarchy fumbled its messaging and struggled to grasp the public's unprecedented fury, Anne became Charles's anchor. Sources later revealed that the siblings shared an intimate, tear-filled conversation in the hours after the news broke, one in which Anne reportedly reminded Charles, "You are not the villain they've made you." It was a rare moment of vulnerability for both, and one that marked a turning point in their relationship. Anne, ever the pragmatist, quietly took on logistical burdens while Charles faced the cameras, his every expression scrutinized. When he flew to Paris to retrieve Diana's body, Anne coordinated schedules and held the family together, away from the flashbulbs. She stood guard over his grief, even as the nation unleashed its anger. The funeral was televised, the heartbreak palpable, but the role Anne played, behind the curtain, was one of unwavering defense. That week, Charles and Anne made an unspoken vow. Never again would they allow the institution to isolate them in crisis. From that moment on, their pact was no longer about surviving the palace. It was about surviving the world together. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away on September 8, 2022, the world stood still. But for King Charles and Princess Anne, time didn't pause, it accelerated. The death of Britain's longest reigning monarch marked not only the end of an era, but the culmination of everything their childhood had prepared them for, and everything it hadn't. In the public eye, Charles finally ascended the throne. The crown placed upon a head shaped by decades of training and trauma. But what few saw behind the black-veiled processions and regal tributes was the reactivation of a bond that had held firm through royal storms. Anne stepping once again into the role of her brother's shield. As King Charles faced a kingdom grieving its matriarch and a press ravenous for narrative, it was Anne who orchestrated the unseen scaffolding of support, from editing condolence statements line by line to coordinating behind-the-scenes logistics. For national mourning events, the Princess Royal became the monarchy's silent engine. And during the solemn vigil of the princes at Westminster Hall, when Anne stood guard beside her mother's coffin, shoulder to shoulder with her brothers, it was more than tradition. It was loyalty in its most profound form. While others debated titles and roles, Anne demanded none. She had no interest in stepping into the spotlight, only in steadying her brothers. According to royal aides, Charles privately thanked her during those tense days, calling her the anchor in the storm. Her presence reminded him of who he was before the crown, of the boy who once found solace in his sister's quiet courage. Their pact, decades old, had come full circle, forged in childhood, tested in tragedy, and now awakened in the kingdom's darkest hour. The monarchy had changed, the figurehead replaced, but the emotional architecture holding it upright, that hadn't shifted at all. It was still Charles and Anne, back to back, carrying the burden in silence, one final time. Just months into his reign, King Charles III found himself confronting not a political scandal or foreign crisis, but something far more personal and perilous. A cancer diagnosis that would send ripples through both the palace and the nation. In early 2024, Buckingham Palace released a carefully worded statement confirming that the king was undergoing treatment for an undisclosed form of cancer, discovered during a separate medical procedure. Though officials emphasized it was caught early and treated promptly, whispers behind palace walls told a more sobering tale. According to insider sources, the king's health was stable but unpredictable, and concerns over his long-term ability to perform royal duties began to surface. What the public didn't know, but close aides later hinted, was that this medical revelation triggered urgent contingency discussions among the top tier of royal decision-makers. At the center of these conversations stood Princess Anne. True to their lifelong bond, she became Charles's private confidant and strategist, urging him to weigh every option, including, for the first time, abdication. Though he publicly maintained confidence, those closest to the king say Anne quietly drafted what some referred to as the continuity clause, a fallback plan that would ensure a seamless transition of power should Charles's health deteriorate beyond recovery. It wasn't a betrayal of the crown, it was protection of it, guided by a sister who understood the monarchy's fragility better than most. As Charles began scaling back select engagements and appearing more subdued at official events, speculation surged. Some tabloids spun tales of a monarch losing the fight, while others floated unverified claims of skipped treatments and emotional isolation. Through it all, Anne remained unflinching, standing just out of frame, managing protocol with military precision and shielding her brother from opportunistic narratives. And though no formal abdication plan has been confirmed, insiders insist that the conversation has already happened, between a king increasingly aware of his limits and a sister determined to protect not just the institution, but the man beneath the crown. As King Charles navigates the unsteady terrain of modern monarchy, a quieter battle brews not in public polls or parliamentary debates, but behind the walls of the palace, a simmering tension between two of the most visible women in his life, Queen Camilla and Princess Kate. On the surface, the royal household projects unity, but insiders suggest the contrast between Camilla's long-contested role and Kate's rising star has become increasingly difficult to ignore. Since taking on the title Princess of Wales in 2022, Kate Middleton's popularity has soared to unprecedented heights, with approval ratings eclipsing even those of the late Queen Elizabeth in her later years. She has masterfully balanced grace and approachability, captivating the public through charitable leadership, parenting relatability, and a modern image of royalty that feels refreshingly human. Meanwhile, Camilla, despite her official coronation as Queen Consort in May 2023, continues to face skepticism. Her history with Charles and the lingering shadow of Princess Diana remain emotional landmines for a public that never fully forgave. Palace sources claim Camilla has grown increasingly uncomfortable with Kate's widespread appeal, particularly as media comparisons intensify. From wardrobe choices to public speeches, every gesture is measured against Kate's effortless charm, igniting rumors of behind-the-scenes strain. Yet it's not just a matter of perception, it's influence. Kate now represents the monarchy. At high-profile events, stands confidently beside world leaders, and headlines global charity campaigns. She is by all metrics the face of the monarchy's future. And while Charles publicly supports both women, it is Princess Anne who reportedly counseled him to recognize the obvious, that Kate's magnetism isn't just good optics, it's strategic survival for the crown. Camilla, ever aware of her complicated past, finds herself trapped between history and the present, trying to hold relevance in a household increasingly defined by the woman once dubbed Weighty Katie, now poised to be the monarchy's most powerful figure. The quiet tension between them is more than personal. It's symbolic of a royal shift that neither crown nor title can stop. For the public, the royal balcony appearances at Buckingham Palace are moments of spectacle, smiles, waves, and flyovers marking historic occasions. But behind those carefully orchestrated lineups lies a strategic game of influence, status, and message control. In recent years, as tensions within the royal family quietly escalated, who stands where on that iconic stone terrace has come to symbolize far more than ceremonial tradition. According to senior palace insiders, the most recent trooping the color was no exception. Every placement, every pairing, every shared glance was weighed, rehearsed, and, most notably, reviewed by King Charles and Princess Anne in private. Sources say it was Anne who encouraged Charles to give Princess Kate and Prince William the front-facing spotlight, subtly positioning them as the monarchy's future. Camilla, though queen consort, was reportedly less enthusiastic about the arrangement, prompting whispers of internal disagreements over optics and visibility. For Anne, the decision was clear. In a time of public uncertainty, the crown's survival depended on showcasing relatability, youth, and forward motion. And Kate, with her soaring approval and polished composure, was the safest bet. But this wasn't just about photographs, it was about long-term planning. Insiders claim that Charles, guided by Anne's counsel, is working behind the scenes to rebalance roles within the firm, quietly reassigning duties and responsibilities to ensure harmony, or at least its appearance. William and Kate now lead key state events, while Camilla is gently eased into more specialized, less visible functions. The changes are subtle, but the shift in power is undeniable. For the first time in decades, the most consequential chessboard in Britain isn't in Parliament. It's the palace balcony, where every arrangement reflects a deeper truth, that behind the smiles and salutes, the monarchy is in a delicate dance of legacy, loyalty, and silent repositioning. And at the heart of it all, steering this transformation without public fanfare, is the Princess Royal, playing the long game for her brother, and for the future he may not live to see fulfilled. In a dynasty defined by silence, King Charles and Princess Anne share a vault of unspoken truths, intimate moments, and guarded confessions that even palace aides were never privy to. Over the decades, they have navigated public adoration and public outrage, often separately but never truly alone. It is within that private alliance, forged not in ceremony, but in hardship, that the most revealing truths about the monarchy quietly reside. One of the most closely guarded secrets, according to senior royal biographers, is that Charles once seriously considered walking away from it all. In the early 1980s, overwhelmed by the suffocating expectations of the crown and drowning in a loveless marriage, he drafted letters discussing the possibility of leaving the royal family entirely, retreating to a simpler life abroad. Those letters were never acted upon, thanks in large part to Anne. With a blunt honesty only a sister could wield, she urged him to reconsider, not for the crown, but for the legacy of their family. She reminded him of their childhood pact, of the strength he didn't believe he had, and of the duty they had reshaped into something personal, not performative. Years later, during another period of emotional collapse after Diana's death, Anne reportedly penned a letter so raw and grounding that Charles kept it tucked in the pages of a travel journal for nearly a decade. That bond, their ability to speak the unspeakable to one another, became a hidden pillar of the royal institution. When both found themselves at odds with palace decisions, such as the crown's refusal to adapt to modern expectations, they often retreated into late-night talks, privately debating the future of the monarchy they were born to protect but never allowed to shape. And though they sometimes disagreed, Anne favoring tradition, Charles leaning toward reform, their mutual respect remained unshakable. It was never about winning arguments. It was about being heard by someone who truly understood the cost of wearing the crown. These quiet exchanges, known only to them, have become a lifeline in a world that demands perfection but punishes honesty. And now, as they inch closer to revealing more of themselves to the public, it's these very secrets, the ones whispered in corridors, scribbled in margins, or shared over silent glances, that may finally rewrite how the world views the royal family. As the monarchy teeters between centuries-old tradition and a rapidly changing world, the quiet alliance between King Charles and Princess Anne may prove more consequential than any coronation or public speech. What began as a sibling bond shaped by childhood isolation has become a cornerstone of survival for an institution increasingly under scrutiny. Their rumored decision to begin sharing more personal truths isn't simply a media strategy, it's a calculated risk, a final act of transparency from two figures who have seen the monarchy at its most majestic and most vulnerable. Insiders suggest a joint documentary or interview may be on the horizon, one that seeks to humanize the crown, dispel decades of speculation, and address the emotional toll of lives lived in service to symbolism. For Charles, the motivation appears twofold: a desire to unburden himself from a lifetime of royal myth-making, and a final attempt to secure his legacy as more than a monarch, but as a man. For Anne, it's about setting the record straight, offering the public a rare glimpse into the sacrifices made not for glory, but for duty, family, and love. Together, they are poised to reveal that beneath the gold and grandeur lies a truth far more powerful: the human cost of wearing the crown. As Charles faces mortality and Anne contemplates the twilight of her public life, their revelations could either strengthen the monarchy's connection with the people or shatter its carefully maintained illusion. What remains to be seen is whether the world is ready to accept royals not as icons but as flawed, feeling individuals bound by a lifetime of choices they never fully made. The crown is no longer just a symbol, it's a crossroads, and as history watches, the question lingers like a silent drumbeat through palace halls. Can truth, finally told, save an institution built on mystery?